Welcome to episode 6 of FilmTracks. We have a very special guest for you today, screenwriter, author, game designer, and former editor-in-chief of PC Gamer. Gary Whitta is with us to talk about the Book of Eli and how music played an important role in the actual writing of the film. Don't go anywhere.
Hosting and bandwidth for Trigla is provided by Media Temple.
Welcome to episode 6 of FilmTracks. For all of you just joining us, Jesse and I are here to talk about sound and image, its relationship with film. And today we have a very, very special guest. Gary Whitta is on the show, who is the screenwriter for the Book of Eli. Hey, Gary.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. Gary is a very busy guy, and it's very awesome that he was able to take an hour of his time to talk about the Book of Eli, which is one of my favorite films. Have you seen it, Jesse?
Yeah, totally.
It's
great.
Totally rad. It took me completely by surprise.
Underrated, for sure.
Yeah. And it's like, and as I was rewatching it actually the other day, I realized that there are like little sprinklets of like music tracks within the film.
Totally.
And it's like, it totally blew me away. So I think that what we should do is introduce Gary. So Gary, again, thanks for being on the show, but tell everybody who may or may not know what screenwriting is all about, like what you had to do for the Book of Eli to prepare for it.
Having been a screenwriter now for many years, I kind of feel like I know less about what screenwriting is all about than I did probably 5 years ago. It's kind of a diminishing returns business, but with Eli, it started as a spec script, which is to say it was an original idea that I had and wrote down without anyone hiring me or suggesting the idea. It was an original. And I always wanted to do kind of a movie that was a tribute to the westerns and the samurai movies that I loved when I was a kid, and kind of throw it all into a pot and put a post-apocalyptic spin on it, and send it out into the world. And we were very fortunate that Joel Silver wanted to make it and got Warner Brothers to buy it for him. And then we got the Hughes brothers and Denzel, and things started to come together really very quickly. I mean, I wrote the script in late 2006, early 2007, and we were in theaters at the beginning of 2010, which set like 3 years sounds like a long time, but in the glacial pace that movies often get made, it's actually pretty good.
So one thing I think that the reason why I think it's interesting that you're on the show is because a lot of people don't realize, and Jesse and I have talked about this on our show, how there are screenwriters like Tarantino that Jesse's brought up, who explicitly write. They write their script with music in mind. And is that something that you do on a daily basis as you write? Do you use music as kind of a mechanism to get into your characters?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important part of my process, and I think it's a really important part of what a lot of writers do. I don't listen to music so much when I'm actually writing. I tend to prefer peace and quiet. But when I'm in the early stages of a project, when I'm kind of breaking the story and trying to find ideas and figuring out what I want the movie to be, and mostly trying to kind of find the tone of a piece, what I usually do is I go out and find music that I feel is appropriate and kind of create a custom playlist for that project that I listen to a lot. I'll have it in the car, in my iPod. I'll listen to a lot of music that I think is the kind of, if not necessarily the exact pieces that you might imagine in the film, certainly pieces that feel thematically appropriate and just help you kind of immerse yourself in the feel and in the tone of a piece. And every project that I do has a custom playlist like that. Eli certainly did. Ironically, of course, a lot of the music that I listened to when I was dreaming up that movie is nothing like the music that's actually in the finished film, and it very rarely works that way. But it certainly was very helpful to me when I was trying to discover what the movie was.
Okay, so you're talking, in terms of the aesthetic of the piece, I think we should show the opening clip, which is a very beautiful piece of cinema, in my opinion, just to give people who may have not seen the film an idea of kind of what the aesthetic of Eli turned out to be. So let's check this out.
Hey, Andy?
Yeah.
Before you do, can you open up Desktop Presenter on that computer?
Oh, okay, we have technical difficulties here. No problem. Desktop Presenter.
You know, I was a screenwriting major in college, and now I'm in music supervision. But I used to write music into all of my scripts, and I used to get in trouble for it because I tell you.
Yeah, they tell you not to do that. but
Do you
sometimes
do that,
can't
Gary?
help
Do
yourself.
you actually put slug lines or like headings of music that you actually want in the scripts that you write?
It's the screenwriters are often taught that that's a rookie mistake and that you shouldn't do that, because the reality is once a movie goes into production, the writer is really at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of a lot of creative decisions that are subsequently made, and music is one area where the writer's opinion of what should musically be in the film is not really considered appropriate or relevant. People don't really want to hear your opinions on that, and so writers will often try to kind of get around that process and put specific songs that they imagine in the film right into the script. They'll say like a specific song is playing on a jukebox, or a specific song will be heard over a scene, and that is usually frowned upon. I personally think it's not a hard and fast rule. I think you can do it, but you have to ration it very, very carefully. You have to really pick your battles. Like if there's a specific song that you feel is absolutely crucial to a scene or a kind of a point that you're trying to make in the writing, then put it in there. But if you're trying to like put the whole soundtrack of what you imagine the movie is going to be into your script, that's probably the first thing that's going to be thrown out.
So basically, if it relates to a character in some way, or if it actually has a piece within the story, then it's kind of okay to put it in because you can defend it ultimately in terms of the overall.
Yeah, but again, I really feel like you have to do it very, very sparingly. I just got finished running a TV pilot, and it's actually the first time that I've done it. I put a specific piece of pop music in there because I felt it was very relevant to the mood we were trying to set, and also it's kind of an Easter egg. Once you see the whole story, you understand why that piece of music specifically is there. But it's just I did it one time. I wouldn't do it again because again, you have to be very careful with the director and other people who are going to go and make your movie feeling like you're trying to do their job for them by already telling them what the musical choices are going to be.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I feel like as the writer, you're kind of the person. You're the imagination.
You're the inception. It doesn't exist without you.
And so it's kind of ironic that it's like you kind of have to leave wiggle room for more creativity to kind of place itself within the film when it's literally coming from your head onto the page.
Yeah, and you really can't help yourself doing it. Like I said, I encourage people not to put it in the script, but I think a lot of writers, I don't think I'm unique in this at all, that a lot of writers do create a soundtrack for themselves, not just to listen to while they're writing the movie, but also they do kind of have in the same way that you do fantasy casting, like in your mind you close your eyes and you see who the actors would ideally be, and that helps you kind of imagine the scene. That kind of projecting a fantasy soundtrack on it as well helps you picture and imagine what the movie might ultimately look like. But again, you really need to divorce yourself from the notion that it's ultimately going to sound like that, because the musical choices that you make and create the fabric of the movie in your imagination are probably not going to be in the finished film, unless you're also the director, in which case you do get to make that decision. But as the writer alone, not so much.
Okay, well that's really, really cool to know, and I think that I mean whenever we're writing in film school, or a lot of writers, aspiring writers who may be watching this, we tend to kind of fill our scripts with a lot of musical choices, and I think that it's interesting that you said to use it very sparingly. But anyway, let's check out this clip for you guys who haven't seen this film. Definitely do so, but this should kind of paint a picture of the post-apocalyptic world that Gary created. So let's check it out. So I think that does a pretty good job. I mean, first of all, Jesse and I were kind of talking about this earlier, that we're kind of like hooked with post-apocalyptic movies. I mean, post-apocalyptic movies are really cool in general. Like the visual style and the aesthetic of them is really interesting. And I think that the way that, I mean, is this visually what exactly you pictured in your mind when you were writing this?
So since we're talking about music, what's interesting about that particular clip that you just showed is that literally everything that was in that clip that you saw is exact, and you can go dig up the original version of the script and verify for this for yourself, is exactly the way I wrote it, shot for shot, moment for moment. It's exactly faithful to what was on the page, except the music that I had in my mind, I didn't put in the script, because again, you don't do that. The music that I imagined playing over that scene is completely and utterly different to what they ultimately did.
What were you imagining?
All credit to Alan and Albert Hughes and Atticus Ross, who composed the music. What they had is far better than what I imagined. I'm actually glad that they never asked me for my soundtrack selections, because if they had put what I wanted, or at least what I imagined when I was writing the movie, I don't think it would have been anywhere near as effective as what they ultimately came up with. So maybe sometimes it's a good idea that the writer doesn't get a say in the music.
So is there a particular song, or was there music that kind of inspired that opening sequence?
So I talk about how I write a playlist, or I put together a playlist that puts me in the tone of the world. And for Eli, I was listening to a lot of gospel and devotional music, because the movie obviously is about faith and has all these religious themes. And so I was listening to a lot of kind of old-time gospel music, like Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers and Johnny Cash. I listened to a lot of Johnny Cash. That's why there's a Johnny Cash reference later on in the movie. And that, to me, again, put me in... I was listening to a lot of very kind of... And I don't mean like celebratory gospel music, but like very kind of... Like the specific piece I was listening to for that scene is a song called Come Let Us Go Back to God by Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers. And it was used in the Coen Brothers version of the Lady Killers. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. And to me, it put me in the place of that scene, which is meant to be, we spend the very first 10 minutes of the movie really just trying to sell the desolation of the world. There's almost no dialogue in the first 10 minutes of the film. There's no other characters. We really just wanted to put the audience in Eli's world, which is this world of desolation and emptiness and this kind of quiet earth. It's kind of the classic post-apocalyptic trope. And so I wanted a piece of music that felt very kind of quiet and plaintive and kind of lonely. But again, what ultimately Atticus wrote, that song's called Panoramic, which is, I think, just the most beautiful piece of music on a very beautiful soundtrack. When I first saw that scene with that music laid into it, I was just totally blown away. And again, it helped me. I finally was able to realize that scene far better than I ever could with my own musical choices.
It's interesting that you mentioned Sam Cooke, and you had actually mentioned that earlier. I have a clip of Come Let Us Go Back to God, so let's check that out and listen to how different it was or what it sounded like.
The earth is in a blaze. The world is in a maze. The way of life today is strange and odd. What happened?
That's a really interesting musical choice for...
You know what I've never done, which I'm kind of interested to do now, is to run the video with that as the audio running over it to see what it actually would have played like. But I don't think it would have been anywhere near as good as what Atticus did. That particular track, I think the whole soundtrack is amazing.
Well, there's one thing
that
about...
particular track, Panoramic, it just goes to another level. I don't think they could have put anything over those visuals that would have been better than that.
Well, there's one thing about the Atticus score that I think is interesting. And I know that Atticus did this a lot in his later films, especially Social Network, in that he almost uses like the sound design to infuse in his score. There's not a specific melody or theme that, like Star Wars, where you can, you have the theme memorized, but it's like Atticus gave a really good sense of space. And so the opening scene is scored effectively because it gives you a sense of kind of like the breath of desolation. But what's interesting...
It's really interesting because I love ambient music, and I think that's what Atticus and Trent Reznor also do so well, is they really create a music that creates an ambience for the scene, that creates an atmosphere that gives you a great sense of place and puts you in that world. And when I asked Alan Hughes, who was one of the directors, who he had in mind for the music early on, he said, "Oh, there's this guy Atticus Ross I know who works a lot with Trent Reznor." And I kind of cringed a little bit inside because I actually didn't know the kind of music that Trent was making at that point. I just thought of like early Nine Inch Nails, and I thought I didn't want the movie to have a kind of a grungy, heavy industrial kind of soundtrack. I think that to me is kind of the post-apocalyptic cliche. I didn't realize that Trent had since gone on to this very kind of moody, more quiet, ambient place, and Atticus was doing that kind of music in tune. So when I finally heard it, it was like, oh, now I get it. I totally understood that they also wanted that quiet vibe as well.
But you know what's interesting about your track, and I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like when if I imagine hearing this track, "Come Let Us Go Back to God" by Sam Cooke, over the visuals of that scene, it's almost, and this happens a lot during the Book of Eli too, where he listens to his music as a character. You really get, I feel like that would be really into his mind. Like, it's a very personal experience, this type of song. It's very individualized. And so I think that it could, I mean, is it a wrong assumption thinking that by listening to this music you were thinking more in terms of his character and not the entire kind of visual scope of it?
I think maybe it's a little bit of both. Certainly the music kind of externally from the movie helps me write. But what's interesting is that music does also play a very important part in the movie. I mean, the whole, when you talk about the inciting incident in a screenplay, like what is it that triggers the movie into action? What is it that puts the hero on his journey? In our movie, in the Book of Eli, it's his iPod runs out of battery power. Because his iPod, for reasons which I won't spoil for people who haven't maybe seen the movie, his iPod and his music is very, very important to him. And it's the one point out of his day where he gets to kind of close his eyes and kind of retreat out of the horror of this world into the beauty of music. And he gets to re-immerse himself into what the world was, a world of kind of beauty and grace that no longer exists in this post-apocalyptic world. And so it was important that we had that scene early in the movie where he takes time to kind of put his earbuds in and listen to the iPod, and that he goes off his course for the first time in a long time because recharging the battery to the iPod is so important to him. And so I think music is often a really great way to reveal character. And I think it's one of the ways that we did it in this movie was by illustrating how important his music was to him.
Yeah, and I actually have a little snippet of this scene to show everyone who's watching, and it's actually a song by Al Green. And did you, when he puts his iPod or his earbuds in, did you specifically have this song in mind that he was listening to?
Yeah, so there was an interesting evolution here, and this is actually this is again a rare case of putting a specific piece of music into the script. And again, I never had an expectation that piece of music would make it to the end. I just would hope that when people, this is when before it was getting it made and I was writing the script just for directors to read, that I would hope that a director might look up this piece of music and hear it, and it would help put them in the tone of the piece. And the specific piece of music that's referenced in the early script is actually a piece of classical music. It's Mozart's Piano Concerto in D, number 26, which, if you're a film guy, you probably would know it as the piece that plays over the closing credits of Amadeus. To me, it's the most beautiful piece of classical music ever written. I just think it's amazing. And so I really wanted something that after the 7 or 8 minutes where you've been in this horrible, desolate world where there are, skeletons and awful things going on, that when he puts those earbuds in and retreats into this just heart-wrenchingly beautiful piece of music, that you understand how different that is from the world that now exists. That the world where something as beautiful as that piece of music could exist no longer does. And so that to me was a specific idea of using music to get a point across. Now, having said that, the piece of music that Eli listened to changed a lot throughout the course of the development of the movie. So the Mozart thing, I think, went away pretty quickly. Albert Hughes didn't want to use classical music. So again, I have no say in that. That's fine. I knew they would come up with something great eventually. And then for a while, actually, it was a piece of music by Incubus called Aqua's Transmission.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's actually what they were listening to. That's actually what was being played on the day. And it's interesting that if you go and watch that scene again, you'll notice that Denzel the way he's kind of bobbing his head to the music is actually kind of technically out of time with the music you're hearing, because he's listening to a different piece that you are.
Oh, interesting.
It was aqueous transmission when they shot the scene, and then at the last minute, Alan came up with the Al Green piece, and they dumped that in at the end, and you can't really tell. It's just an interesting piece of trivia that what Denzel is listening to is not what we're hearing in the movie.
Well, let's check out this clip so that everybody can hear what the Al Green song is, and we'll just show maybe 30 seconds of it. So check it out. Here we go.
Think of younger days when I lived for my life was everything.
So that's just a short clip of the, I mean, I don't know if you guys could see, it was a little bit dark on our screens, but he's basically just kind of having this moment by himself, sharpening his knife, getting his gun ready in this kind of refuge shack of some sort. And that's really interesting that Denzel Washington wasn't even listening to the same song. I mean, do you know why there was a sudden change in the music at the last minute?
I'm not entirely sure. I think maybe Alan kind of felt like they hadn't nailed it, that the piece of music they had was good, and everyone was basically happy with it. But I think Alan always kind of felt like there's another piece out there that is going to fit better. This is good but not great. And then I think very late, I actually don't know how he came to it. I'd have to ask him, but he discovered that Al Green piece pretty late in the process. And again, it went in, post-production, it went in editing. And again, I thought it was a terrific choice because it's such a, in the same way that the Mozart, it's really kind of more of a contemporary version of the Mozart ideal, which is, it's not a classical piece of music, but it does the same thing. It's this kind of soulful, kind of haunting, plaintive, sad, kind of bluesy piece of music that, takes you out of the world, but it is also kind of sad and remorseful and very kind of haunting in its own way. So I thought it was a great choice.
Well, there's one, I mean, it's interesting that you've listened to a lot of gospel music to kind of get into the characters and to get writing and, into your creative process. And the film, it's the story in itself has kind of a religious overtone to it a little bit. When I saw it, it was interesting because when I was like thinking about seeing it, I was like, oh, this looks like kind of like a religious film. But when I watched it, it wasn't at all. Like I left was like, that wasn't a religious movie at all. It was a good story. Is there a reason why you kind of picked the, kind of like the religious aspect of it? Like did that have any influence in your story, or was that kind of like an idea that you had early on to be like, oh yeah, I think that's where I want to go with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that the movie, I don't see it as a religious movie at all. I'm not religious. A lot of people think I am because I wrote that movie. And what's interesting to me about the movie as a whole is that I really think people take from it what they bring to it. Like atheists don't like the movie. They think it's a pro-Christian propaganda film. Religious people love it. Christians love it. I've seen the movie's been shown in churches. It's been taught at like religious school. Yeah, it's crazy. But I felt like based on that reaction on both sides of the fence, that at some point I needed to kind of go out and say, this isn't meant to be a pro-religious film. To me, it's actually much about the dangers of religion and the dangers of religious faith as the positive aspects of it. And the idea is that faith is like anything. You can turn it into a positive or a negative force. And you see that represented in the antagonist and the protagonist in the movie. So that was kind of my take on the big picture of it. And then in terms of the music that I was listening to, it wasn't that it was necessarily religious music that I felt was appropriate. It just tonally felt right. I kind of wanted to be listening to the kind of music that I felt might be on on Eli's iPod and to try to kind of walk in his shoes a little bit as I was writing the movie. So again, it's probably for the best that kind of devotional music didn't go into the finished film, because it probably would have reinforced the notion that it was meant to be a religious film. Again, I think it is a film to some extent about religion, but I certainly don't think of it as a religious or a Christian film.
Right, I know. I honestly, I did not feel that at all. I mean, did you get the sense of that, Jesse? Because I was like,
just the story.
Yeah, I left the theater and I was like, I didn't get that I didn't get the religious angle at all. I mean, it was a great element and tool to use, the fact that Gary Oldman's going after this book to be able to control people for evil is awesome. And Eli, I think what's amazing about it is that he does use this iPod for retreat. And a lot of us, I know when I was, making films and doing stuff for school, and I know Jessie a lot, when she has to listen to music for, to pick songs for her films, always walks around with the iPod and always uses it as a retreat. And I think, for me, Denzel's character was easily identifiable because it's out of all the mayhem, he's able to completely just hunker down in the middle of nowhere by himself and be wrapped around in this kind of world of music that you only hear a few times. You only hear once or twice throughout the entire film, but sprinkled in at right moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think music is medicine. I think music is therapy. After it's pretty typical, right? After a breakup or whatever, your heart is aching. You listen to sad music. You listen to stuff that kind of feeds your whatever it is you're feeling at that moment. And this, I kind of feel like is really kind of the logical extension of that this guy's world is just awful in every possible way. And so that iPod, that piece of music, and also the book that he reads, it's these little kind of shards of culture and erudition, things that are no longer created. And so these things are all the more valuable because there's nothing new being made. You just have to kind of cling to the stuff that still exists.
Right. And there's one other scene actually that I wanted to ask you about that's kind of similar to this beginning one with Al Green, and that is the scene where Eli goes to the cannibals and the home of the cannibals before he gets caught, and they play an old 78 record, and the guy winds it up. And, she's like, you have to play music because it's so soothing. And he, goes to the record player and winds it up and puts the old 78 record. And it's this disco song by Anita Ward. And it's, awesome because it's completely random.
It's great.
And she's, dancing to it while they're serving tea. And I think we should check that out because I definitely want to ask you about it. So here, let's check this out real quick.
How about some music? It's so soothing. George! My baby. How do you like it? Nice? Please. Is that good?
Good.
Rich.
It is. It's amazing that you two have survived out here all by yourselves.
Well, now, George is something of a handyman. He did a lot of work on this place, making it safe. We may be old, but we're resilient. We've no more than a few tried to take this place from us. Haven't we, George?
Yes, we have.
Right.
I want to show you something. Come on.
George, no! Not now.
Come on.
So this song actually goes through the entire scene, up until actually even when they have the shootout with the evil guys. And I'm curious, is this another instance where you wrote music that ended up not getting into the finished film, or did you actually pick this Anita Ward film, or song rather, for the scene?
So that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and the story of it I think is fairly interesting. So we're about 3/4 of the way through the movie, and when I was writing the script, it kind of occurred to me that it is such a desolate world, and it's a very harsh place, and we've had scenes of murder and attempted rape and people getting their heads chopped off, and it's just such a horrible world that I felt like the audience at that point desperately needed a break. Like they needed to have some fun because there's not a lot of moments of levity or comedy. There are a few, but they're very, very subtle and far between. And so I felt like we've got to have a moment here that can kind of act as like a pressure valve for the audience where they can just have some fun, even if it's only for 5 minutes before we get back on kind of the dark journey. And so those two characters were deliberately, created. George and Martha are meant to be kind of eccentric, and they were supposed to be some just fun for the audience for 5 minutes where they can kind of relax and have fun. And the gramophone actually wasn't in the original version of the script. That was added later. And I don't think we ever knew exactly what the piece of music was going to be. But what we did know was that piece of music was going to function as a great kind of comedy shorthand. Like by throwing a piece of music in there that just seemed kind of absurd and kind of silly in the context of everything that's going on around us in this world, we knew that we could probably get a laugh from the audience and give them that pressure valve that they needed. And we didn't know what it was going to be for a while. I think at one point, I literally remember sitting around with Denzel and Albert Hughes talking about what we wanted it to be. And Denzel and I both really liked Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive, that we thought, again, kind of has the irony of kind of fitting the survivalist vibe of the movie, but at the same time, it's a song everyone knows. It's kind of turned into a karaoke staple. And again, in that context, would just seem so silly. And we would get that laugh. And I remember we pitched it to Albert Hughes, and he didn't like he liked the idea of like doing a 70s disco anthem, but he didn't want to use that particular song. And he said, we'll figure it out. And he went away and came up with that later. And I actually didn't know what they were going to use until I saw a rough cut of the film where that song had been dropped in. And it worked. It's actually one of the most satisfying moments for me is when you write something and create a moment that you hope is going to get a specific reaction from the audience, and you get exactly that reaction. It's so satisfying. The first time I sat with a live audience in a movie theater and watched that scene, and that Anita Ward song comes on, and the audience just erupts in laughter. It's like, yeah, it worked. And part of the reason why it works is music can be comedy. It can be a great moment to totally change the tone of a scene or the tone of a movie. And I think that's a really great example of how that can work.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny too because she actually dances with it. Like she's serving tea and she's like moving her head back and forth, and they end up turning out to be cannibals. So it's like, and like they go out and see these graves of people that they've eaten, and they're like, "Are you hungry? Do you want some food?" And they like open this plate of meat, and the song's still playing in the background, and they're like, "I don't think we really want to be here." And then they end up getting caught.
And as you say, it plays through the entire shootout that follows. And Albert wanted that to happen. Again, the juxtaposition of this violent shootout, which is brilliantly photographed, with this kind of fluffy, disco pop song, which just seems so light and frothy on the top of that. Again, it's just a great juxtaposition. And I remember the one thing that I did actually get to contribute to kind of the musicality of that moment was that Albert wanted the song to end with the classic kind of record skip, where the record had got stuck and was playing a loop of like the same couple of seconds over and over. And I said, I feel like we've seen that a million times. Like, what should happen is once the gramophone's out of power, the song should just kind of slow down to a stop, like, until there's nothing left. He said, I like that. And that actually did end up in the movie. And again, it really was about figuring out how to use the music as, kind of almost like another actor in the scene.
Well, one thing that I think, if to our viewers who haven't seen the film, I know that we've been showing a lot of scenes that have kind of these non-score elements. Let's just quickly look at kind of why these moments stand out in the film by showing just a short clip of what Atticus Ross's score sounds like juxtaposed to like Anita Ward and Al Green. So let's check out this scene. So that's just a total quick and dirty scene, just to give you guys an idea of kind of what these kind of random sprinkles of songs were kind of intermixed with, which I think is awesome. Like, I don't know, I love movies that have a score, but then you have these songs that either define characters or kind of move a story in a certain way that either brings comedic relief, as you were saying, or intensifies the scene with two characters or a single character. And I think that's awesome. I actually have a picture that I want to pull up of you with Atticus. Let me see if I can do that. Can we go to the computer? There we go. So my next question for you, Gary, is were you actually involved with Atticus at all? Like, were you able to go to the scoring sessions and see the score being made, or what was your involvement with it?
So before we jump, I just want to acknowledge, I'd say something about that last clip that you showed of Denzel and Mila there, because that's another interesting example of how music works in a scene. That scene that you saw there is not in any version of the script. I don't think that was ever written. I don't remember it. I saw it in the movie and I was like, wow, that's a really cool thing that they added. I think they improvised it on the day, because I think, in the context of that scene, Mila's just almost been raped and killed by these two thugs out in the wasteland, and Denzel comes and saves her. And that scene was added on just, I think, from the directors basically saying, we need to acknowledge the emotional fallout of that moment. Almost being raped is not something you just recover from. We need to kind of explore that a little bit and see that it's had an emotional toll on the characters that were involved. And it's a beautiful moment. It plays without any dialogue. So, there's no writing in it at all, really. There's no dialogue. And it's just this moment that plays out in visuals and in music. And the whole scene is sold, really, I think, just off the quiet of that moment. And I think that says a lot about how much music can really mean to a scene. And again, this is why I love the Hughes brothers. In most other movies, that scene would have been cut for time, because it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't advance the story. It doesn't really tell you anything that you need to know. If that scene had been cut, the movie would have played, I think, much the same way. But the fact that they wanted to just dwell on those little character moments where we acknowledge something that's happening to a character and just live in the moment and let the music kind of wash over you and draw you into the emotions of those characters, that to me is what makes the movie, elevates the movie to another level.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and I know Jesse will agree with me on this, is that, like, if there are beats in a film, let the music breathe a little bit. And we actually had Deborah Luria, composer, on a few weeks ago, and she was talking about how she used music to literally create breaths, kind of like if the film itself were breathing, you have these beats with the characters that they just hang on just a little bit longer to be able to either let the score or music be able to come out and live and breathe a little bit. And I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head, because right before the scene that I just showed you guys, Mila was just about to get raped, and she actually hugs Denzel for the first time. She's like, thank you so much for saving me. And the music at that point is very, like, not melodic. It's very, like, sound effects, like, twangy, and gets really into your head, and then it just ends up going into this, like, very slow motion, very cool kind of just, like, breath for a second. And it's not like she's hugging him or, like, whatever. She's like, they're both totally in their own space, but you really do get a sense that they're still on their own, just grateful for just being alive.
Absolutely.
So anyway, getting back to your relationship with Atticus, do you have one, or were you able to go to the scoring sessions?
Or did you just get that one photograph
or
to tell people?
Were you just a fan that was like, I have to get a photograph?
Yeah, and I don't even love that photograph very much, because I'm about 70 pounds heavier in that picture. It's not one of my favorites, but what can you do? So I didn't get to go to the scoring sessions, which I wish I had, because they actually recorded the soundtrack at Abbey Road, and I would love to have gone there and seen that with the full orchestra. I'm sure it would have been amazing. I saw some pictures of the scoring sessions, but I did get to go and hang out with Atticus at his studio in LA when he was kind of mixing the soundtrack and dropping it into the movie. And I really just went, not in any professional capacity, but just as kind of an interested observer. I'm, trying to learn as much about other aspects of filmmaking as I can with every project that I do. And so and I love music. Like I'm a soundtrack collector. Again, I think a good soundtrack is the difference between a good movie and a great one. And so I was really, I had a very strong vested interest in hearing what the soundtrack was going to be like. And I had heard nothing at that point. So the first time I got to hear it was when I got to go to Atticus's studio and he played some of the songs for me. It's slightly different to what ended up in the finished film because they constantly tweaked them. But I got to hear the soundtrack for the first time and go, oh, wow, this is going to be something special. And also got to see them how they drop different musical cues like actually into the action and the level of precision that they have where they want musical notes to hit at just the right moment. It was really interesting to see the craft of the composer and not just creating the music for the scene but really making sure that it lays right into the shot by shot visuals that you're seeing in a way that is properly complementary.
So do you during your creative process, and I think this would be interesting for a lot of people who aren't screenwriters or aren't kind of working in movies all the time, do you, like, if you have an idea as a writer, as someone creative, do you start with kind of making a first draft first and just kind of dumping your idea on the page, or do you actually make a playlist of music and listen to it and then go to writing?
The music for me usually comes first because, like I said, when I'm actually doing the writing, like page by page of a script, I generally can concentrate better when there's no sound around me and I just have peace and quiet. But again, when I'm kind of in the one step removed mode of like trying to figure out what an idea is and trying to kind of give it shape and figuring out if there's even anything there, the very kind of early gestational phase of a project, trying to find the tone of a piece, trying to figure out what you really want to write about. Again, I know I can very quickly identify pieces of music that at least sum up what the tone of the piece is. So I'm writing right now a science fiction movie which is set in deep space, and so again, there's a different kind of sense of desolation and remoteness. And so I've been looking at again, I listen to a lot of ambient. I don't really listen to songs. I listen to a lot of ambient music, the soundtracks. Again, tonal music. So I mean, again, a lot of the music that Atticus has done on other projects like The Social Network and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I find myself listening to a lot of that kind of music as well because it's tonally appropriate usually to the kind of thing I'm trying to write, and I just find it very soothing and just kind of massages your brain and kind of helps bring those ideas to the surface.
So you said that you were a soundtrack collector. Do you go see movies specifically? Like, do you think of the music first? Like, do you go to movies that you like score composers specifically? Like, do you kind of like think musically when you watch films, listen and critique the score, and then go buy it? Or have you been doing it for a while?
I don't really. There aren't any really specific composers that I would go see a movie for. I mean, there are certain ones that are among my favorites. I have many times gone to see a movie and I'll just buy the soundtrack immediately after I've seen the film because I know I'm going to want to listen to that again and again. And again, sometimes it's just because I like that piece of music. Sometimes I know that's going to be useful on a future playlist. That's the kind of music that I know is going to come in handy down the road when I'm writing something that may be set in a similar world. And so I do that a lot. And again, like I said before, I really think that music can elevate a good movie into greatness or take a good movie the other direction and kind of destroy or at least really diminish what the movie was trying to do. That's why I was probably music on Eli was the area that I was the most nervous about because it was the area that is probably the most out of my control. I had no idea what to expect, and I kind of felt like if they put a soundtrack on this that I personally hate, it's going to really spoil the movie for me. I'm not going to love it as much as I would otherwise. Fortunately, I was so lucky it really went the other way, and they created a soundtrack that, had it been on someone else's movie, it would have been one of those soundtracks that I bought on the ride home. Mm-hmm. So to have Atticus, who then immediately went off and won an Oscar for The Social Network right after that, to have a soundtrack for my movie, and his is the kind of music that I usually listen to trying to think of movies. The fact that his music is actually in one of mine, I mean, it's one of the greatest thrills in my life. Yeah, no, it's awesome, and I think Atticus was this his first. Do you know? Was this his first score?
He's worked on many things.
But his first motion picture.
Yeah, he's been a collaborator with Trent for a long time, and I know the reason why the Hughes brothers knew him is because he had done the soundtrack for a TV show that the Hughes brothers had worked on, and so they had that association. But I didn't know what kind of music he did. I didn't know what to expect until I heard it. And then I instantly became a fan, and the Social Network, and again Dragon Tattoo, and pretty much everything that he's done since. But I think I'm right in saying that Eli was the first theatrical feature film that he did the soundtrack for.
Yeah, I'm looking at IMDb now, and Book of Eli was the first theatrical. He did Touching Evil, which was television, for a few years, and then now is like after Eli and Social Network, he's just kind of exploded. And I think that he's definitely a composer that's on my radar to follow. And it's interesting because I listened to a lot of Social Network, obviously, because Social Network was awesome, but like the soundtrack specifically was really interesting, and a lot of elements of Eli were definitely in Social Network, which is a very character-driven film. And it's interesting because a lot of the tonal choices and the thematic elements of the Eli score and music, and even the non-score elements of it, definitely added to the character development of Denzel Washington's, of Eli. And I don't know, I mean, I think Atticus will be the type of guy that ends up making scores to a lot of character-driven films, even if they're like
He's
big...
doing the score for a movie I'm working on right now, actually.
Really? What are you working on?
Broken City. It's like this, like, kind of like a Chinatown, like gritty film noir type thing.
Is it? It's a movie. It's like a.
It's a real movie.
Studio picture.
It's not like studio, but it's got a pretty decent budget. It's like Mark Wahlberg and Russell Crowe and all these people.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's Alan Hughes directing as well. That's his next movie after Eli. So the Atticus collaboration continues.
That's totally cool. I had no idea.
Yep.
And the let's see, the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, that was Atticus Ross as well, right? Or was that just
Trent?
And
Yeah.
Trent. Okay. All right.
But the funny thing about Girl with Dragon Tattoo is that Atticus was having scheduling issues, and they were like, "Oh, Trent, like you can just do it alone." And Trent was like, "No."
He was like, "Screw that."
Yeah, I was like, "I need Atticus, or I'm not doing it alone."
Yeah, the other thing about Atticus that I find so interesting, and it's why his soundtracks sound unique, is it's the same reason why I asked someone about this years ago. I said, like, when you hear like Brian May play guitar in Queen, there's no other guitar in the world that sounds like that. You hear like that guitar and you instantly know you're listening to a Queen song. And the reason why that is, apparently, is that Brian May built his own guitars. They don't sound like any other guitars because he makes them uniquely for himself. And I had a similar experience when I was sitting with Atticus and he was playing a part of the soundtrack for me. And I said, what the hell, what is that instrument? I've never heard anything like that. And he said, well, it doesn't really have a name. It's something we kind of made. Like we ripped the guts out of something and made this thing. And so he creates a unique sound because he's creating not just orchestrations, but the instruments that they're played on. They make these unique instruments, and so they get a unique sound.
Is just out of curiosity, are you on Spotify? Do you use Spotify to listen to your music, or
I do have a Spotify membership, but I haven't been using it very much.
Because it would be cool. You should create collaborative playlists and see what kind of cinematic music people come up with, because you can do that on Spotify. I think you can create.
Yeah, that would actually be a great thing to do. You have like Google Docs. We often use it for collaboration on documents, and that's actually a great idea. Like I could say on Twitter, "Hey, I'm writing a movie. Here's the basic premise. Suggest appropriate music," and I could have people. I could kind of crowdsource my playlists from now on. That's a cool idea.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then I'm sure like a lot of people on here would be like, "Oh, totally,"
My boss does that. Yeah, he'll be like, I need songs like this. Like send them to me.
And he'll do Spotify. Does he do Spotify?
He does Spotify. He doesn't do open playlists on Spotify. I don't know why though. But like on Twitter, he'll like ask for suggestions.
It's like Spotify is just like amazing. I pay for it monthly and it's like cheap as hell. And they have a huge library. But like the great thing about it is that one of the biggest things that I always was annoyed about was that you couldn't ever share your music without sending somebody a physical CD. But Spotify is like...
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, you know what I mean, though. Like, for the most... Well,
or a file.
A file. Yeah. You couldn't, you had to send them a file, or you had to send them an email with a file or something like that. Spotify is awesome because you can totally create collaborative playlists that are private. I don't think they're on your, public timeline or anything like that. So only people that have the links to them can be able to add songs to it, which is just cool. They don't have everything, and they're really skim on soundtrack stuff. But hopefully that will change in the future. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm not actually sure how well it would work because it's not always like I'm working on a sci-fi movie, so I want to listen to sci-fi music. I'm literally just pulling up iTunes right now and looking what I was listening to for the sci-fi piece that I'm writing right now. And some of it is from other science fiction movies. And again, it's all ambient stuff. Some of it is from like video game soundtracks. Like it's not necessarily from. It's not necessarily music that would belong in the final film, but for some reason, when I'm early in the process, it's music that again helps me find the right tone. It's less about the premise, less about the story, and more about tone, which is kind of harder to put your finger on.
Right. You should create a picture for the cover of the playlist and have that be kind of like the picture of whatever tone kind of aesthetic,
like a mood
you want.
ring. Yeah.
So anyway, I have a quick question for you, because I was actually, when I was looking you up online, I found an old Blogspot blog that you did a while back, and it actually has some discussion about the Book of Eli, and you have some deleted scenes that I kind of wanted to direct people to. I mean, is that something that you've kept up? I mean, it seems like the last post was like in December.
Yeah, I don't. I'm like 99% of other bloggers who start a blog and then never really maintain it. But it was a place for me to put a couple of Eli related things that never made it into the special features. There were a couple of scenes that were filmed and cut from the final cut. There were also a couple of scenes that were written that were never even filmed. They were cut from the scripts. And a couple of years later, I just thought, what's the harm? It's kind of interesting to throw those things online so that if people are interested, they can get another little insight into how a movie develops and how certain scenes enter and leave the movie and what the reasons are behind that.
Right. No, exactly. And actually, if you guys that are watching now, go to gwhitta.blogspot.com to check out some deleted scenes. It's actually pretty cool if you read them, to give you an insight as to kind of cool stuff associated with the movie. Gary, thanks so much for being on the show. I don't know, Jesse, do you have any questions for him or anything?
I think we covered everything.
I mean, pretty much it's great to have somebody that is an active screenwriter who is thinking creatively about characters, but using kind of music as a foundation in a lot of senses to be able to create these worlds that we see on screen. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize that there are people that are writing this on the page, and it takes a specific kind of, a certain way to think about characters and how they interact to be able to actually have a story that you watch and enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can give you an example of how a musical idea even ended up in the script as a non-musical one. I mean, so like I said to you, I listened to Johnny Cash a lot when I was writing the movie, and particularly kind of the devotional stuff. God's Gonna Cut You Down and stuff like that, which was actually used in one of the trailers. I mean, great minds kind of think alike, I guess.
Yeah.
But because I was listening to Johnny Cash a lot, I was having lunch with the directors very very close to shooting, and because I'd been thinking about Johnny Cash so much, I pitched them this joke. I said it would be kind of funny if Eli quotes the Bible all the time. He should say something that kind of sounds biblical, but it's actually a line from a Johnny Cash song. And Alan said, "That's great. You gotta go put that in the movie right away." And I was like, "Oh shit! Now I actually have to come up with find a line from a Johnny Cash song that sounds like it could also be a verse from the Bible."
How much Johnny Cash did you listen to?
My girlfriend, who is a big Johnny Cash fan, found a line almost immediately from a song called "Greystone Chapel," which is on Live at Folsom Prison. And when Eli says, faith is a flower of light in a field of darkness that gives me the strength to carry on. Yeah, that's from a Johnny Cash song. And so it wasn't a piece of music that played in the movie, but just referencing a song lyric. Again, it's one of the few moments in the movie that actually gets a laugh, because it just seems so, talking about Johnny Cash in the context of this world is just so silly,
right,
that it plays as a comedic moment.
We actually have a clip of that. Let's check out this clip real quick.
Here at Folsom, a house of worship in this den of sin. You wouldn't think that God had a place here at Folsom, that he saved the soul of many lost men. Now there's grace.
Pretty cool, and I think it's actually really fitting for Eli's character as well.
Yeah, and again, in another version of the movie, I mean, I get to kind of expand the universe of the movie beyond what was shot in my mind, and in my mind, what isn't Al Green on Eli's iPod is probably Johnny Cash. I like the idea that he was a Johnny Cash fan. Again, it's just he's this kind of samurai badass on a mission from God, but he's also a Johnny Cash fan. It's just something that it just makes him human in that moment. And again, music is the great kind of human universal connector for everyone. Oh, you like Johnny Cash, and you suddenly feel like you empathize or understand a little bit more about that person. So you can use music even without using the music itself, just by referencing it.
Right.
They can be great little touchstones for character exploration.
No, that's really awesome, and I had no idea that was a little interjection from Johnny Cash. That's actually pretty cool. So I have a question for you, Gary. Is there anything else that you're working on right now besides the sci-fi and television?
Yeah, I'm working on it. So I just finished a TV pilot, which we'll see what happens. I'm working right now. I originally come from the video game world, and so that's still very much in my DNA. And I always like to be involved with video game projects when I can. So right now I'm working as a consultant and a writer on the video game adaptation of The Walking Dead, which is coming out pretty soon.
It's pretty cool.
And just got done working on a movie called After Earth, which M. Night Shyamalan is directing right now with Will Smith, and that's going to be a big summer movie for next year. So pretty excited about that one as well.
That's really cool. And Shyamalan, of course, uses a lot of James Newton Howard for his movies, so it'll be interesting to see if he uses him again. I'm sure he will.
Yeah, they've been collaborators for a long time. I've got no idea what he's thinking for this movie. It'll be interesting. Again, the writer has nothing to do with this stuff. Knight's going to go away and make his movie, and when I see it, I'll see what music he put in.
You're going to be like, Knight, I have to have Johnny Cash.
That's right. You got to have Johnny Cash.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for spending an hour with us to talk about your craft and talk about the Book of Eli. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you very much, and to all watching, thank you. If you want to check us out on iTunes. We're on Trigla. Go to jfklives.com. Jessie has an awesome music blog that she posts a lot of really cool music from her music supervising genius. Definitely check it out. And check us out on iTunes, rate the show. And again, Gary, thanks so much. Tune in next week.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.